Happy March, everybody. It's MrScaryMuffin, and this week for Thoughts Talks on TF2, I was thinking about talking about one of my favorite maps on TF2, but then I remembered I promised a few people that this episode I was going to talk about esports, pro gaming, casting, basically games as a career besides making games. So a few people recently have reached out to me saying that they've started streaming or working on their YouTube channel. I'll link Newbeezy and DFG below so you guys can check them out. Be gentle, they're just starting out. But Maximilian, who's a YouTuber I follow, he touched on a similar topic a few weeks back, and he made a very good comparison between pro gamers and professional athletes. Athletes tend to have a fairly short period of time in which they can compete and earn the big bucks, to so to say. If you imagine a normal breadwinner working from, say, age 25 to 65, that's a 40-year career. Comparatively, hockey players rarely continue playing past their 40s, and Olympians rarely see a third Olympic. So in comparison, that's about 15, 20 years only that they're actually doing their thing as a career, which is half a normal career for the average Joe. Gamers, on the other hand, they tend to peak around the time they're in college because they suddenly have all this free time, and you can only say, hey, I got a paper and a test so many times. You have a lot of free time to do stuff, and a lot of people in your area, in the dorms and kind of stuff, will be playing games, so you'll be hanging out and getting a lot of good practice, having a good player pool. But after college, after university, these people tend to settle down and maybe find a quote-unquote real job. So that's about a 4 to 8 year range, and of course, the decision to stop gaming has a lot to do with perception about gaming as a career. It's a bit of a vicious cycle, but even if we assume, for example, that a gamer can continue to play and perform at a competitive level for the full 15 to 20 years of a professional athlete that a professional athlete has, will even then their game of choice last that long, right? If we're talking about, playing Smash Brothers, Brawl, let's not say Melee, because Melee's coming back in Evil. If you're playing Smash Brothers Brawl, the game itself has a okay lifespan, but beyond that initial 4-5 years, I don't really see people continuing to want to watch it and want to play it so much. To say, Call of Duty has a new iteration every year, right? The 4 to 5 years is kind of a bit of an arbitrary number I just threw out there, but it's a good number of time to expect before something newer or better comes out that requires the gamer to adapt. And while for a gamer, adapting is something that they're used to doing, you'll see people drop out from the scene every shift. Every time there's something new come out, there are some people who will be like, I just don't have that much, I don't feel like continuing on, or I just don't think I have that much time. It's just the way things are, right? You'll always lose a few people, and you'll gain new people too, right? Thankfully, we do have what I call evergreen games, and I suppose I will just link somewhere here to some of the previous episodes where I talk about evergreen games. But the best example of an evergreen game that I can think of is StarCraft, which continues to draw crowds and has live tournaments and a lot of coverage and a lot of people playing it, kind of thing. And there are exceptions to even the 4 or 5 years kind of thing, right? If you have StarCraft, the StarCraft has been going on for over a decade, and then now we have StarCraft 2 with HOTS coming out this month, and I think it's Legacy of the Void coming out in some unknown time in the future as well. So it's gonna be going on for a really long time, and I don't know, is it too much of a stretch to say that it is possible for a person to be playing competitively or even doing casting for 20 odd years? Is that so much of a stretch to say? It's let's say for now, let's assume that maybe let's say yes, okay, for now, right? So there are exceptions, but then we actually have to look at money. How viable is it to play video games as a career, or to cast video games as a career, or anything to do with esports as a career, how viable is that to spend 20 years of your life on this? Will you be able to retire comfortably and happily and not have to become a Walmart greeter later on in your life, that kind of stuff, right? I remember reading a study, and I don't have the link anywhere, but it was a random ass study on some newspaper kind of thing. I don't even remember where I read it, but it said that for most people, in order for them to live a content and happy life, they need to have a household income about $75,000 annually, which translates to over $6,000 a month. And I won't pretend to assume like what people's living conditions are and what kind of country they are in, all that kind of stuff. But let's just set this as kind of our comparison base, our template kind of thing, right? And I also won't pretend to know how much, you know, the big time streamers and the casters make from their subscriptions and ad revenue, but I can tell you guys that I'm basically making less than, say, $2 a month through YouTube with just 1,000 subs, right? And as for gamers, the biggest deal that I know of is Slayer S Boxer from way back when, this Korean StarCraft player who got a 1-year endorsement deal for $100,000 US, and that's on top of whatever he earns in tournaments and all that kind of stuff. For tournament earnings, we can think about the recent Street Fighter 25th anniversary tournament, and that was like the top prize was a $10,000 cash prize and a free car. So gamers can hit that magic number of 75,000 annually, but the question is can they sustain that for their entire career? And that's a really big question, because that can affect how well they can retire afterwards. Going back to Maximilian, he mentioned that, again, comparing to sports athletes, a lot of pro gamers should be using their time as a pro gamer to develop other skills while they are competing. These skills will allow them to move on to other things when they retire, namely casting or streaming. So kind of like a pro athlete, after they stop playing, they then become a commentator, a color commentator for the same sport. Like, this kind of stuff happens, though there isn't that much room per se for this kind of stuff, right? There is more room for sure in the digital space than it is in the professional leagues and sports kind of stuff. These skills will allow them to move on to other things, right? It's really healthy. It really helped them kind of stuff. But I don't want to be a Debbie Downer kind of stuff. But it's always on the back of my mind. Something I'm thinking constantly is like, how long will people pay to watch you play games, right? There are going to be people who are, after a while, they'll stop. They'll move on to other things. They might settle down, get kids and stuff like that, have their own jobs to worry about. But you'll also have new people coming on who will start following you and start watching you. And will that balance out? Will you be able to sustain a viable career? Right? It is food for thought. And I suppose the other thing that is kind of food for thought is even the big money-making sports leagues these days, like the MLB, NFL, FIFA, and all that kind of stuff, they started somewhere. I mean, the first couple of decades of the NHL for hockey had players who needed to keep a day job in order to survive. It was definitely one of those, don't quit your day jobs, pie in the sky, reach for your dreams kind of thing, right? They played the game simply because they loved the game and they wanted to continue playing at a high level with other people who are high level, so they get that rush, that challenge, right? Because they like the competitiveness of the sport. And even now, most Olympians, they struggle to find funding and sponsorship in order to do what they really want to do in their life. But they have to still keep their future in mind. At least for the NHL, it has moved on to become a huge multi-million, if not billion-dollar entertainment industry. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, rookies who are drafted into the NHL, they start off at that 75,000 mark, which is astounding. And all it took for the sport to get there was just people who were dedicated to the game. Spectators who loved the game and paid to watch it, investors who loved the game and supported it in every which way that they can, and players who loved the game and work to keep the game alive at a high level and to keep the game on people's minds. And although we have things like certain Olympic sports and poor volleyball, which I absolutely love, and just there's no professional league for, right? Esports is kind of on the cusp of this edge right now, and streaming itself is getting bigger and bigger every year, and we might get there yet. Really, we might reach that pie in the sky kind of idea where people can be making a lot of stuff, because especially with live events, if you think about musicians, how they make some money from their records being sold, but they make a lot of money from doing live shows, right? If we push esports towards more live venue stuff, the way the Koreans did with StarCraft, for example, right? Because they have a lot of live tournaments, people show up, they, the venue is used, people pay the money to watch this thing happen live. If we can get esports towards that big entertainment industry goal and have people join in, it can get there. We can have people want to play and want to cast and want to watch, and it is like the reverse of a vicious cycle. It will actually self-propagate itself once we get to that point. It'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. All it takes is just some people who love the game and want to dedicate themselves to it. So it's not a bad time to continue thinking about it, and it is a viable thing, I suppose. Just don't quit your day job just yet, but also don't be afraid to love the game. Anyways, that's my thoughts on it. Games as a career, it's possible. Hasn't quite reached the thing where it's like, oh yeah, man, you're a hockey player, go for it. It's just it's almost there. It's almost there, and it can be up to you guys. Anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you guys again next week. Ciao.
No.